Well, Jody Wilson Raybould joins us on the line now from Ottawa. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for taking our call.
No problem.
Did the Prime Minister himself ever tell you to order the prosecution to make a deferred prosecution agreement with SNC Lavalin?
The Prime Minister never directed me to interfere in the prosecution. However, that's not necessarily the story over the course of the number of months that we talked about.
What did the Prime Minister say to you about it?
Well, the discussion that I had with the Prime Minister is clear in the evidence that I gave to the committee, and I'll let that evidence speak for itself. I'm still obliged to comply with the waiver that was provided.
But you have said that you had a series of meetings with Prime Minister Trudeau in Vancouver that ultimately led to your resignation from cabinet. What was said in those meetings?
Well, there was a series of meetings, and the basic issue or the challenge that I had as the Attorney General is that in those series of meetings from a number of individuals, there was political pressure that was placed upon me to interfere with the prosecution, which is something that is entirely inappropriate.
And what did the Prime Minister tell you about that?
Well, it's clear from my evidence in terms of the conversation I had with the Prime Minister on September the 17th that he was talking about the company, was talking about jobs in Quebec and the Quebec election. I had asked the Prime Minister directly if he was interfering with the prosecution, and he indicated that he was not. That was a long conversation that the Prime Minister and the clerk and I had on September 17th, and my evidence that I gave on February the 27th goes into more detail.
Sources have told CBC News that you laid out a number of conditions for the Prime Minister and his staff to end this disagreement over the SNC Lavalin affair sooner rather than later. Conditions like having key people fired. Did you ask that Gerald Butts, Michael Wernick, and Mathieu Bouchard be fired?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I do not respond to leaked information from anonymous sources. Other than to say or to note that the continual use and inappropriate use of this tactic is something that I can't respond to. I'm still covered by a waiver with respect to this particular issue. But what I can say is that I had hoped all along from the very beginning that the Prime Minister would have accepted some responsibility for wrongdoing in this case and essentially apologized to Canadians.
I understand not wanting to respond to unnamed sources, but that's exactly why I'm asking the question. I'd like to hear it from you rather than from unnamed sources. Did you ask that Gerald Butts, Michael Wernick, and Mathieu Bouchard be fired?
There was a number of conversations that was had, but those conversations came after January the 14th, after I was shuffled out as the Attorney General, and those conversations are still covered by confidence, and I respect the confidences that I had.
So is what those unnamed sources are saying, is it true?
There were a number of discussions. What I will say about those conditions that were reported, one of them was around whether or not the current Attorney General would issue a deferred prosecution agreement. And I have to say unequivocally that I would never interfere with the independence of the Attorney General.
So you did not seek an assurance that your replacement, David Lametti, would not overrule the Director of Public Prosecutions and direct her to give SNC Lavalin a deferred prosecution agreement?
I would absolutely never do that. I'm very clear on what my role was as the Attorney General, and the discussion that we've been having for the last number of months is around the fundamental principle of prosecutorial independence, a principle that I have upheld and will continue to uphold.
In that list of conditions, did you say anything at all about how the incoming Attorney General should proceed with the case against SNC Lavalin?
Of course I didn't. I wouldn't, as the previous Attorney General, accept any direction in terms of how I conducted myself as the Attorney General, and I certainly would never do that to this Attorney General or any other.
Did you ask for an apology from the Prime Minister, either in caucus or in public?
I have hoped for the Prime Minister, and I've had opportunity to speak with him, that he would have taken some responsibility for this situation, for the wrongdoing, and I think an apology to Canadians would have gone a long way.
What was it that made you decide to record that phone call with Michael Wernick?
Well, and I know this has been a discussion and a subject of conversation, certainly in Vancouver and across the country. I, over the course of many months, had a sustained level of political pressure on me to interfere with a prosecution, a situation that I found to be untenable. And it culminated in a couple of meetings on December 18th and the one that I had the conversation with the clerk of the Privy Council. And I felt that something inappropriate was going to happen on that phone call. I felt that I needed to protect myself. And in any other circumstance, as I said in my written submission, it would have been inappropriate, but I wanted to ensure that I protected myself and that I had a clear record of the conversation. I never had any intention of releasing it. It was essentially an aid memoir for myself to ensure that the conversation was clear in my mind and that I had an accurate reflection of it.
It's been suggested that your wording in the conversation sounded scripted, that you were trying to put something down on the record, which may eventually have been made public.
Well, I mean, I've heard that too. I received a call from the clerk, and I was responding to things that he was bringing up. There was nothing scripted about the conversation. Again, I didn't have any intention of releasing it. I eventually released it, and people can judge for themselves from the contents of the tape. And I would hope that people would look to the contents as opposed to simply focusing on the tape itself. I released it because there was a number of witnesses that came before the Justice Committee after I had given my evidence that were saying things that simply weren't true. And I felt compelled to release a tape to ensure that people could judge for themselves, that people could hear the truth.
Your dismissal came after you revealed that you had taped a phone call with Michael Wernick, your dismissal from caucus. Do you stand by that decision to record that phone call and to make it public?
I do. I mean, I honestly don't regret anything that I have done in this situation. I find it unfortunate that it has gone on for the amount of time that it has. I wish that things had happened differently, but for me, in terms of my actions, I believe that I was doing my job and ensuring that I upheld what I believe to be, and what I think most Canadians believe to be, a fundamental principle of a tenet of our democracy, and that's around ensuring an independent justice system and ensuring that prosecutors are enabled to exercise their discretion free of political interference.
And during that call, you reiterated that you believed what the PMO was asking to do amounted to political interference. But you also said that you had talked to former Chief Justice Beverly McLaughlin, who Wernick said could give the Prime Minister or you a second legal opinion, could give you some advice. Did you speak with former Chief Justice Beverly McLaughlin?
Well, I never said that I spoke to her. I said that I could give her a call. I haven't spoken to the former Chief Justice since this situation has been public. I have a high level of respect for the former Chief Justice, but I had received what's called the Section 13 note advising me of the situation with respect to SNC, and I had made a decision, and the decision's not necessary, but I had reviewed what the Director of Public Prosecutions had sent to me, did my own due diligence back in September around the appropriateness of me as the Attorney General issuing a directive in this regard. And in this particular case, I did not believe it was appropriate, and I upheld the decision of the Director of Public Prosecutions.
But it was a suggestion from Michael Wernick that you seek the advice of the former Chief Justice. I mean, Ms. McLaughlin may have advised you that it would be inappropriate for you to overrule federal prosecutors and grant a DPA. Would that not have strengthened your position and perhaps resolved all of this much sooner?
Well, there was not only did Michael Wernick suggest external legal advice, but several others in the Prime Minister's office suggested that I do that. I was and am very clear in terms of what the role of the Attorney General is, what authorities the Attorney General has to issue directives under the Director of Public Prosecutions Act. The suggestion of seeking external legal advice was something that I did not believe was necessary in this case. As I said, I did do my own due diligence on this particular Section 13 note and the actions of the Director of Public Prosecutions, and I was 100% confident that in this particular case, it was inappropriate to intervene with a decision that the independent prosecutor had made.
After you resigned from cabinet in February, Prime Minister Trudeau said that he wished you had come to him sooner. He said, this is a quote, "If anyone, particularly the Attorney General, felt that we were not doing our job fully, responsibly, and according to all the rules as a government, it was her responsibility to come forward to me this past fall and highlight that directly to me. She did not." Did you ever voice your concerns directly with the Prime Minister last year?
I did. I voiced my concern directly to the Prime Minister on September the 17th, pointed out my serious concerns about the nature of the conversations that we were having. I asked him directly if he was politically interfering with my role as the Attorney General. And subsequent to that conversation, as is in the public record, there were a series of meetings and telephone calls with myself and my former Chief of Staff where I relayed the same concerns, where I asked many senior staff people in the Prime Minister's office to stop having these inappropriate conversations with me. And then that culminated on December the 19th when I had that call with the clerk of the Privy Council, who is essentially the Deputy Minister to the Prime Minister. And he, in that call and on that conversation, he invoked the Prime Minister's name on many occasions and had indicated that he was going to go back and talk to the Prime Minister after we had talked. And so, yeah, the answer to your question is, of course I did. But again, as the Attorney General, I had made up my mind based on the information that was provided to me by the Director of Prosecutions.
The SNC Lavalin affair has dogged the Trudeau government now for 2 months, during which time you have stood your ground while the Liberals have been tumbling in the polls. While all of this was going on, while you were doing your best, as you say, to uphold the principle of judicial independence, were you also thinking about the damage this might be doing to the party and the Prime Minister?
Oh, of course I was. I mean, throughout this period of time, it's been incredibly difficult, of course, for me and my family, and I know it's been difficult for members of caucus of the Liberal Party, and I've had the opportunity to go out in Vancouver Granville and knock on doors and have heard concerns that individuals have raised around damage to the party, around, and I believe, the necessity to ensure we continue to talk about important public policy issues and to continue to have discussions around, justice, around climate change, around Indigenous reconciliation. I have to say, and this is what I've said to people that I stand on the doorsteps with in Vancouver Granville and chat, is that I was doing my job and that I believe fundamentally in the very principles and foundations of our democracy. And one of those is the independence of the criminal justice system, the independence of prosecutors, the rule of law, that the law applies equally to everyone, and we need to ensure that those foundations continue to be strong so that we can ensure that when we make decisions about fundamental public policy issues like climate change, that those decisions are rooted in the foundations of our democracy. For me, at the time when I was the Attorney General and to this day, I believe that we as Canadians need to continue to hold true to what creates a strong democracy, and that is these fundamental tenets, that is the voices of Canadians, that is ensuring that when we see something wrong or when we see actions that are taken that are inappropriate, that we are enabled to have a voice, that we use our voice, and that we ensure that the truth comes out, and that if something inappropriate happens, that we take responsibility for it, and that we ensure that we do not make that mistake or commit a wrongdoing again.
And so if Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives form the next government, do you think you will have played a part in that?
Well, as I said to your earlier question, I believe in doing the right thing, and I believe in speaking the truth. I have to say that I was a part of the government for 3.5 years, and the government has done many really important things, and there's still legislation that's in the House right now that needs to move forward. Conversations around climate change need to continue, around affordability, around building an economy that works for everyone. I believe in Canadians, and that they can look at this issue or this chapter and make the decisions for themselves of what's best for the country as we move into the October election.
Your father, Bill Wilson, and Chief Bob Chamberlain have both said that the years under the Harper government were, in their words, a dark time for First Nations people in this country. They've also said that Andrew Scheer as Prime Minister would spell a return to those dark times. What do you think about that?
Well, I haven't heard my father's comments or Chief Chamberlain's. One of the reasons why, and I'll answer the question this way, I got involved in politics was one, because the then leader, Justin Trudeau, asked me to run. And I had never thought about entering into federal politics. I was, as you know, an Indigenous elected leader, and I believe fundamentally that in order to transform Indigenous communities, we need to, as a government and as a country, create the space for Indigenous peoples to be self-determining. That's why I ran. I had, as the regional chief at the time, been very frustrated with the previous government in creating that space. I would not ever take away from the Prime Minister and the government what has been contributed towards closing the gap with respect to Indigenous peoples. I do still see, as I saw when I decided to run in federal politics, the fundamental need to create the space for a transformative relationship with Indigenous peoples based on the recognition of rights. That is something that I am entirely committed to among many other important public policy issues, and I'll continue to speak my voice as long as I have the great fortune of being the Member of Parliament for Vancouver Granville in that capacity and in all other capacities that I'll be fortunate enough to fulfill.
And do you worry, though, about the possibility of a Conservative government and what it might mean for Indigenous rights and reconciliation in this country?
I think that it is a worry. I think that we need to have an approach to resolving and recognizing Indigenous rights that can't be confined to one political party, can't be confined to the governing party, the Conservative Party, or the NDP and other parties. What is required to transform the relationship with Indigenous peoples, and I've said this all along, is to take a nonpartisan approach to these issues to create the space for transformation. I I was a member of the Liberal Party. I still believe in the values and the principles of equality and inclusion and justice that I feel underpin the Liberal Party, and so many Canadians signed up for the Liberal Party back in 2015, believing in the same thing, believing in doing politics differently. I think for major issues that confront our country, like Indigenous reconciliation, like the environment and climate change, we have to take a more nonpartisan approach to solving these issues, because that's how solutions to these issues will be sustainable.
But after all of this, you still feel that way about the Liberal Party, do you?
I didn't enter into federal politics lightly. I had never been a member of a political party. I came from Indigenous politics, where we don't have political parties but function by way of consensus in solving really difficult issues. That doesn't mean that we agree all the time, but that we determine what the best approach is to tackling issues. And for me, entering into federal politics, the vision that the now Prime Minister and I shared back then is still the same vision, and the same values for me underpin that vision around ensuring that everybody has a voice, and ensuring equality and inclusion in decision-making and a different way of doing politics. I absolutely still believe in that. I know the hundreds of people in Vancouver, Granville that I've talked to, and the thousands of people that have reached out to me still want to do and be involved in politics and ensure that they feel that they have a voice, and that voice is important to making sound and long-lasting public policy decisions. And for the people that signed up for the Liberal Party leading up to 2015 and been involved, their voices are still important, and people need to ensure, and for me, being involved in politics, that my voice still matters. Every voice still matters, and I need to ensure that I continue to do what the people in my riding of Vancouver-Granville elected me to do, which is to bring their issues to Ottawa, because, having been involved in federal politics for 3.5 years, and it's had its challenges, but I've been really fortunate to have been involved in some major legislative changes that have been brought in within the last 3.5 years, and I want to continue to be involved in using my voice to contribute to the important issues of our time.
And does that mean you will run again in the fall election?
It's a question that I need to be really reflective of, and I have to say that I'm quite disappointed, to say the least, and I think I said that before, to have been ejected from the Liberal caucus. I need to, of course, continue to talk to my husband and my family. I'm coming home, and I'm so looking forward to getting back to Vancouver, to talking to my to volunteers in the riding, to particularly constituents, and hearing what they have to say. And again, I think that I still have an important voice. I still have a commitment to ensuring that our government, the government, politics in Ottawa is and becomes a different way of making decisions, a different way of doing politics, and what the people of Vancouver Granville feel, and I hope that they feel at liberty to tell me how they feel. I'll make a decision of what I do, but I certainly think that continuing to be involved in federal politics is something that I'm incredibly open to.
Jody Wilson Raybould, we appreciate your time very much this morning. Thank you, and safe travels to you as you head back to Vancouver.
Thank you, and have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye now.
Bye.